of people in my school, like drugs, like smoking pot, and a lot of people do it, especially my class. It's pretty bad. So I have a friend he has a lot of friends who smoke pot, but he always tries to get away from it. And like one time he was really tempted, but he just said, like, I don't want to do this because like I want to stay clean. Like I don't want to fall into that because it leads others down a bad path.
At my school, there's a lot of partying, also a lot of drugs and alcohol use. And I never associate myself with those people or go to such parties. But one time, one of my good friends, she was like thinking about going to one of the parties. And so I said, no, like, you can't do this. So what I did was I went over, I picked her up from her house and I brought her to my house and I invited some other friends over and like we had like our own get together, like we did like some other activity like tie-dyeing or something, to get her mind off of it, and so she didn't go down to that party.
And I remember one day in Spanish class we had a test, and I didn't even know we had a test. And when we took it, I was just struggling. And all you see is my whole class having cheat sheets and just whispering answers. And I was like, I'm not going to cheat. When we got our test back, I got a 64, but that's better than a 62, so.
Although temptation in itself is not a sin, it can serve to be a tipping point that has the potential to lead us down that path.
In the book of James, chapter 1, we read, "No one experiencing temptation should say, I am being tempted by God.
For God is not subject to temptation to evil, and he himself tempts no one.
Rather, each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire.
Then desire conceives and brings forth sin, and when sin reaches maturity, it gives birth to death."
James captures the dynamic of how temptation can be treacherous slope to walk.
Let's go back to our spotlight guest, Danny, where he discusses how his struggle with drugs and alcohol led him into an even more dangerous activity.
And how, through the help of a caseworker, he was able to turn his life around.
I didn't think I was good enough. So anything that kind of came my way that would make me feel good quick, I would fall into that temptation. And a lot of it had to do for myself, it was about fitting in. It was about, well, Danny, if you take this, or you use this, or you do that, or you say this, then you'll be cool, or you'll feel good. I had a lot of opportunities to get out of this life I was starting to live. I was a great swimmer, and out of everything that I always tell people that I regret the most is my swimming career. I had potential of being a great swimmer, and I blew that because I decided to party. And I always felt for myself, God always, for me, always gave me signs and always a way out. God was always talking to me, but I never wanted to pay attention. God was always saying, Danny, please come back. But I would just, I'm gonna keep walking this path. And God put so many great people in my life, but they just weren't fun enough. That's the way I think I felt. You don't have to have drugs and alcohol to have a great time, but I didn't know that I was a huge marijuana smoker. I started finding myself selling. I started seeing myself stealing, manipulating. Again, I was that straight A student, and it turned into all E's. I got kicked out of high school. I just kept falling and falling and falling. And I was starting to look toward God. I was like, there's no other answer but God, because nothing's helping me. I ended up into an outpatient program. I'm actually work a 12-step program and recovering. There was an individual, his name is Jim Timodansky. As he brought me back to God is what changed my life. I remember first meeting him, and he asked me how my relationship with my father was. And I never thought about that before, never did. And the first two thoughts that came to my mind, it made me cry. And that was a huge turning point in my life. I was starting to become a freer person at that moment and not have to worry about that.
I think people who are most susceptible to temptation are people who don't have like a strong sense of self. It's kind of like what Danny said. He said he wanted to feel good, which is why he gave into temptation so frequently. And I think today, nowadays with the media, with like TV and internet and like all these super skinny models, like it's a lot easier for us to lose who we are. So what about you guys? Do you think that there are more things that lead us into temptation today than there were for previous generations?
It's definitely a lot easier to be tempted in this generation than past generations. I mean, because from what I've heard from like different families, parents were a lot stricter in past generations. Teachers were.
I think the temptations are the same. I just think that like the typical American has become more selfish and more materialistic because of we're being surrounded by all this media, like Jess was saying before. And so I think more and more people are giving into the temptations, and it's just becoming like an easier route, like to go on than taking like the high road, the road with the morals. And I think the ironic thing is that there's more awareness about temptation nowadays, and there's more resources that if you need help, you can go to. However, I think that more people are falling into this temptation despite the awareness.
Because it's so much easier, like to just like do what everyone else is doing and not try and be your own person.
I think it's like much easier to be tempted nowadays because like what Allison said with the media, how like you can even access it in your home, whether it's like TV or like internet.
This temptation, this big problem, is for, I think it starts with the parents. Like, I think if parents are stricter and they watch over their kids, you know, closer, so they're not going out to parties, so they're not cheating, and that the punishments are stricter, I think that would be a way to solve the problem. And if like just being a better influence on their kids.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily fair to put most of the blame on the parents. I think we're, at this point in time, like we at our age are our own individual people and we make our own decisions. So I think, yes, initially the parents do have a lot of responsibility in the beginning, but I think they have, in the end, more responsibility to be there for their kids when they make those decisions and to help them learn, rather than, you know, preventing us from learning.
Overall, I think the acceptance of what's like acceptable in today's society is what leads to the neglect and like why people just fall to that.
And what's acceptable now is completely different from what was acceptable back then.
As Danny's story affirms for us, we are never without hope.
Next, he speaks to us what he feels are the biggest temptations for teenagers these days.
And how coming back to God helped him to get back on the right track in his life.
I think the biggest temptation for teenagers is definitely sex that I've seen, you know, or just being influenced by that. And you know, I can't speak on the side of women, but for a guy, it's really difficult. Like they always say, like food, you know, the really good tasting food's really bad for you, but then bad tasting food's really good for you. It's the same thing with life, I think, a lot of times. A lot of those really not so great things, a lot of times the church kind of says, you know, no to, they're just so easy, and you can get so tempted into those things. And some of the things are really hard to do, like not having sex before you're getting married. It's not that easy, especially when this world is saying it doesn't really matter anymore. Having it on TV, I can understand why so many kids would fall into that type of temptation, because everyone's doing it. It's not like we're free from temptation. It's always going to be there. I always call it the demon on my back. He's always there nudging me, always, kind of that idea of the devil and the angel on each shoulder. Just because you know, I don't live the lifestyle that I've lived anymore doesn't mean that I still don't struggle with the idea of still wanting to fit in, or you know, feeling good about myself. And changing my life and changing my energy to more positive, I started attracting really beautiful people into my life. And it's amazing. It's amazing how you live your life a certain way, how your life starts falling into place. I've lived my life a certain way now, and it's been through the church, it's been through my 12-step program, it's been through what people have taught me, the people I've surrounded myself with, who either were or who follow the church as well, or a 12-step program, and live their life a certain way, and that just inspired me.
Some practical steps to overcoming temptation might begin by simply recognizing that we will be tempted.
And with that knowledge, we can prepare ourselves before we are faced with temptation.
Trusted friends are also a valuable gift.
Sharing with someone your struggle with temptation can not only relieve you of the stress, but they can be a source of strength when you feel weak.
So, what advice do you guys have that would be helpful to others who face temptation?
I think surrounding yourself with good friends is really important, because if you have that good influence, you know somebody has your back. So if you start to slip into that temptation, they can catch you.
I think as well as having good friends to back you up, I think you need a good foundation, because without that foundation, like, it's hard to fall back on something.
Let's see what the teens on the street have to say about this.
Let's check it out now.